Hey guys, it's really good to see you again. So today I'm going to be looking at more part 2 questions for the IELTS Speaking, and these are the questions for January to April 2020. I'll be giving you ideas, language, idioms, lots of things to talk about, and the topics are all around activities and events. Let's get straight into it. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Keith, and I run a website called IELTS Speaking Success, and I really want to help you improve your English, give better answers, and get a higher score on the IELTS speaking test. Today, we're going to be looking at activities and events. By the way, if you want to have one-on-one classes with me, then I do teach on italki. You can find out all the details on the link below. And if you prefer to study on your own, I also have a video-based online course on Udemy. Again, have a look. You can find the link below. It's full of 6 hours of video. It's a complete course to help give you idioms, pronunciation, build up your confidence, lots of tips and tricks for the IELTS speaking test. So you can check that out as well. Today, though, we're going to begin looking at several different questions that are all around activities. And these are the new questions. So if you're taking the test in either January, February, March or April, you should watch this. Let's begin with this question. Describe a job you would not like to do in the future. You should say what it is, how it is done, how you know about it, and explain why you would not like to do this job. Now, this is a tough question because I can think of jobs I would like to do, right? But jobs I wouldn't like to do is a little bit more difficult. And of course, here, I'm going to talk about ideas rather than particular jobs, because the job I do, maybe you wouldn't do, or the job I wouldn't do, maybe you already do. So it's more about why we don't want to do the job. Why don't you want to do a certain job, right? Maybe you don't want to be a teacher, right? But I'm a teacher. I enjoy being a teacher. It's different strokes for different folks. That's what we say. So let's think. The first thing we can think about is if a job doesn't match your personality, if it doesn't match or suit your personality, then you're not going to really want to do that job. So some jobs, maybe you need to be. So for example, if you're quite an introvert person, you probably wouldn't want to do a job where you have to be socializing, talking to people, very gregarious. So maybe you wouldn't want to be a salesperson or a rock star or an actor. Maybe, right? If you're an extrovert, maybe you don't want a job that's a very quiet job, sat at a desk all day, all on your own. So matching your personality is a key thing, right? Now, some jobs you may find boring, and that's why you don't want to do them. Notice, I would say, I find it boring, not it is boring, because boring for you might be exciting for me. So I find it boring. And other good words for boring are mundane, mundane. It's such a mundane job. Mundane, not Monday, it's similar to Monday, but mundane. Change the stress, mundane. It's such a mundane job. Being an accountant, it's such a mundane job, right? Or being a bank clerk, it's such a mundane job. Another nice word for boring, monotonous. 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 It's a really monotonous job, right? I mean, can you imagine doing that job where you're sat at a desk all day and you're with numbers or code? And so being a software engineer might be a really monotonous job. Might be for you, maybe not for me. Depends, right? So we've got boring, mundane, monotonous. Nice words to talk about boring. Jobs also, maybe you don't want to do it because it's not rewarding. So when you have a job, you want to feel good about it. You want it to be rewarding. So I want a rewarding job. So you may say this job, maybe an administration job, it's not a rewarding job. I don't think it's a rewarding job, so I wouldn't want to do it. Okay. Me personally, to give an example, right? I wouldn't like to be to work in a supermarket on the checkout till, because that's a very customer-facing job, and you need to be engaging with customers all day, and you need to be smiling, and you need to be friendly and very patient when the customer can't find the right change and she's getting all the coins out. You need to be patient, right? And friendly, customer-facing. Now, I don't think that's a job I could do. Excuse me, I wouldn't like to do it because it's not rewarding. It's a bit monotonous. I think it's a bit monotonous. I would find it not very rewarding. So that's for me. But all of those customer-facing jobs, maybe it's being a salesperson, or so what else have I got? A lot of the government jobs, or working in a bank, being a bank clerk, that can often be, if you're the teller, facing the customer every day. So these are all things I wouldn't like to do. So finally, for me, I think I would finish by saying, I wouldn't like to do this because I need something that makes me tick, right? I need something that makes me tick. That's a lovely expression. It makes me tick. Tick is from the clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. So it works with the tick. So something that makes me tick is something that makes me work, makes me excited, makes me alive. So I want something that makes me tick. That's why I wouldn't do that job, right? It has to be worth getting out of bed for. I love that expression. It has to be worth getting out of bed for. You may have a similar expression in your own language, but I need something that's worth getting out of bed for, where you feel excited in the morning. So that's a reason I wouldn't be a supermarket checkout person, for example. Okay, excellent. Let's move on. Describe a change that could improve your local area. You should say what it is, how it would affect the area, why you think it's a good idea, and explain how you feel about this change. Okay, so changes in your local area. So that's probably your town, city, or community. Talk about changes. If there's a change to improve something, there must be a problem. So what are the problems you have? I think there are two kinds of problems, right? There's A and B. You've got your infrastructure problems and your non-tangible problems. Ooh, those are two big words, right? So infrastructure is the buildings, the bridges, the roads, the railway. It's the kind of the hardware of the city. Oh, that's nice. The hardware of the city. The non-tangibles is the kind of the service. Non-tangible means you cannot touch it. So things like education, healthcare service, those kind of things. The service, which would be, following my metaphor, the software of the city. How cool is that? I think I've just invented a new metaphor. The hardware of the city, the buildings and the roads, and the software of the city is the services, right? That's a new metaphor. Keith O'Hare, patented. So if it comes, then we can talk about problems with the infrastructure. So maybe there's a bridge is broken. There are potholes in the road. Potholes, those big holes that appear in the road. Maybe there is things that are broken, buildings where the facade is falling down, or the whole building is falling to pieces, or the government building needs a renovation, all sorts of problems with the infrastructure. So you could talk about those. You could talk about the the services, right? So you could talk about problems with the healthcare, the hospitals, the education, the schools. But one thing, right, is don't be too general about it. So don't talk about education. Education needs improving because in my country, blah, blah, blah. No, because this is part 2, you still need to be quite specific. And the more specific your example is, the richer the language you will use. If you think about it, you talk about education, you're using the same words, very general: education, development of technology, we can use computers in the classroom. It's very limited language. So talk about a specific school. There's a school in my neighborhood, and there's a change that would really help it is that if they had more teachers. There's not enough teachers. They've tried to recruit from the local neighborhood and they can't. There's not a big enough supply of teachers. So I would suggest they recruit more widely from around the country and maybe look at changing the recruitment standards so they can get really top quality teachers to come to that school in my neighborhood. So can you see there's a wider language? I'm talking about recruitment and neighborhood, and it's just a different language and it'll be much richer. So be as specific. If you're talking about your services like hospitals, talk about a hospital, a particular hospital, something needs changing, or a particular school. Okay, make it specific. Because remember, in part 3, you're going to be talking much more generally about things. So be nice and specific. Those are things you can talk about, right? I was thinking about hospitals where there's, the A&E waiting times are not very good in our local hospital, or there's always long queues. Couldn't they do something about the queues? Or maybe it's the bus service that isn't good enough and you never know when the bus is coming or not. They're always late. They need a bus lane for those buses. Why don't they have their own special bus lane? Make sure they're on time, for goodness sake. Anyway, those are some things you could talk about for your local area. Excellent. Next one. Describe a challenging thing you have done. You should say what it was, when you did it, why you did it, and explain how you felt about it. Now, for a lot of people, challenging things may be, at home, at school, or at work. Challenges at home you may have around managing your time with family, managing your work-life balance, right? It's hard to get a work-life balance if you're working so many hours. The challenge is finding time for your family. So that work-life balance may be important. Maybe there are relationship problems you want to talk about. Possibly you don't get on with your mother-in-law. Mother-in-laws are notorious for having a difficult relationship with the son, right? And the daughter-in-law. So maybe you could talk about that. Maybe it's work, right? Or maybe it's study. Now, if you're studying, learning English, there's a challenge. IELTS, there's a challenge. Here's a funny thing, right? You could say to the examiner, a challenging thing I have done is having the IELTS speaking test. I find it really difficult because you are so intimidating and I find it hard to speak naturally and fluently to a complete stranger. And the examiner will be like, I'm sorry. That'd be quite a funny one to do, right? That would be great. I would love to be a fly on the wall if you do that. Let me know if you're going to do that. Well, you don't know, right? You don't know what question you're getting. But, so here's the thing. I guess you can talk about IELTS and your learning of English. Absolutely. That's a challenging thing. So say what it is, learning of English, why it's challenging, why is it so difficult? Interesting words could be challenging, tough. I mean, I was thinking of tough, right? Something's tough, it's tricky, it's difficult. Other words, it's a struggle, right? It's a real struggle. I don't know why, but in natural English, just to say it's a struggle seems a bit flat. And I think it's just natural to say it's a real struggle. It's quite a struggle. Put in those adverbs. It just sounds so much better. It's a real struggle. Learning English is a real struggle. I find it pretty tough, right? What else? Other words. Well, here's an interesting thing, right? I was looking before on this website because when I need synonyms, here's a tip. Go to a thesaurus. A thesaurus is a synonym dictionary. Macmillan have a great one. This is not an advert. I just found it and I use it myself. Macmillan Thesaurus. The link's down below, I think. I'll put it there. And put in the word, if you put in, for example, challenging, and it comes out with tough, difficult, taxing. There you go. Now, taxing is a great word. Something is taxing, then it's difficult. It's often mentally difficult. So that's quite a taxing job. It's a taxing responsibility. Studying English is really taxing. So that's something as well that you could talk about. You could use those words. Taxing. Another one is grueling. And that's more about physical activity, right? So if you were climbing a mountain that was challenging, it was a really grueling task. It was hard work. So use a thesaurus. You can get some really nice synonyms. Finally, you may want to say, with a challenge, talk about pushing the boundaries or pushing your comfort zone is to do something that makes you uncomfortable because you know you will grow and get better. So we often do a challenge because it pushes our comfort zone. Or maybe we feel happy about it because I know if I push my comfort zone, I'll be more successful. I'll be better. Okay. So lots of things you can talk about. You could talk about projects at work. Remember, be specific. Talk about a specific project, a specific exam or aspect of your learning English that is challenging. Right. If you want, you can talk about very easy, simple challenges. So maybe you set yourself a challenge. That's good. Good collocation. Set yourself a challenge. I decided to set myself a challenge to get up early in the morning, right? There's lots of videos on YouTube now about get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go and run 5 kilometers, do some yoga, eat some kale and be healthy. So maybe you're doing a challenge to eat better food. I decided to set myself a challenge of meditating every day for 5 minutes, or to do more exercise, eat better food, whatever it is. Maybe you do a challenge to raise money, right? Some people want to raise money for charity, so they do a challenge. Maybe I'm going to run, 3 kilometers, and people will sponsor me and give me money, and I will donate that money to charity. Do you remember the ice bucket challenge? Yeah, that went viral on YouTube several years ago. That was a challenge. You poured a bucket of ice cold water onto yourself, but it was about raising money for charity. I think it was ASL, right? And it was motor neuron disease. It's a special challenge to help raise money for charity. So there you go. You could talk about that. Describe an experience you had as a member of a team. You should say what the team was, why you joined it, what you did in the team, and explain how you felt about it. The examiners, we have never understood why the cue card says you should say, because you don't have to follow those points, right? You could mention them and they're a great guide, but if you want to give different details, you can. The examiners never look at the bullet points. The main thing is describe an experience you had as a member of a team. So it's a team where you were a member, your experience in the past. That's the key thing you have to follow, right? That top line. So what about teams? I guess the first thing that pops into my mind is sports teams. When you're a member of a football team, basketball team, a training team, athletics team, all sorts of sports, then you're a member of a team and you're doing stuff there. You could also be, if you're at school or university, I hope you have teamwork. It's a 21st century skill. You need to do teamwork. So there should be projects that you do together as a team, even if it's just for one day or for 5 minutes. Doesn't matter. It's a team. It's teamwork. And in some ways, the more specific, the better. At work as well, there must be projects where you work together as a team, different members of different departments pull together to do some kind of teamwork, right? So, for example, I remember when I worked several years ago, we had a department, or a team actually. It was a team called the diversity team. And the goal of the diversity team was to ensure we had a diverse workforce and that we pulled on all the different abilities of different kinds of people in our organization, be they women, whether they are men, women, homosexual, whatever the sexual orientation, whether they were working from home or working in the office, whether they were disabled with a handicap, whatever it was, building diversity. And so we had to collaborate, we had to pull together to come up with a plan. And then it was good because I think when you put your heads together, you come out with more creative ideas and everybody plays their part. There's a role for everybody to play in the group. The trouble with teamwork, right, is sometimes some people don't pull their weight. They're kind of sat back, they don't get involved as much, and they really need to help each other out and be proactive so they're working well as a team. Okay, so I just noticed there's lots of interesting language there, right? So pull together, work together, and pull your weight is to do enough. There's always somebody doesn't pull their weight because they don't do anything. They're a freeloader, right? They let everybody else do the work. But put your heads together. Everyone's only got one head, but 2 heads are better than 1, 3 are better than 2. Put your heads together and you come up with more creative and innovative ideas. Creativity, innovation. Creative, innovative. Remember when you're learning words, remember about the word families, that noun, adjective, adverbs. Make sure you learn them all. Right. Is there anything else? Let me check my notes. No, there isn't. Let's move on to the next one. Describe a time you enjoyed an indoor game. You should say, but you don't have to, what the game was, where you were, who you played it with, and explain why you enjoyed it. Okay, so again, is this about the future or the past? The past, right? Enjoyed. Okay, is it a game you play indoors or outdoors? Indoors, right? So you don't want to be talking about 12-a-side football because that's outdoors. 5-a-side indoor football, maybe. Okay. Now, enjoyed. Okay, a time you enjoyed an indoor game. Look very carefully at the question because it supposes that you participated in the game. But you could talk about when you watched a game and you enjoyed the game, right? You're watching, but you enjoy it. If you're participating, you also enjoy participating. Here, with this question, you could talk about both. But do pay attention. Just make sure if you get similar questions, does it say watching, enjoy watching, or enjoy participating, or just enjoy? If it's just enjoy, it can be both. Okay. So indoor games. Again, the first thing that pops into my mind, that's a great expression, right? The first thing that pops into my mind is chess. And most countries have some form of chess. There's the kind of the international chess where you've got Robert Fischer and all the kind of the famous Russian chess players. And you've got different kinds of chess. There's Chinese chess, there's the Go game from China. I think different countries also have different variations of chess. It's a very popular indoor game. Likewise, you can use the same board to play drafts. Maybe you play a board game, and there's lots of board games that are family games and for children as well. The ones I know, the old favourites are Monopoly, Cluedo. There's lots. There's so many, I can only remember 2. But listen, go on the website, eBay, Amazon, Baidu, and just check board games. Get lots of ideas. Other games that you may play inside, especially if you're thinking about children, and if you have children, and if you're playing with your children, well done, good mum, good dad, play with your children. It really is important. Hide and seek. Do you remember that game? It's great, where you go and hide behind the curtains and the children have to come and find you. They count to 10. 1, 2, 10. They come and they run, and then they pretend they can't see you, but they can because you're so big behind the curtains, and they have to find you. Hide and seek, great game. Charades is another great game. It's a Christmas game for us in our family. It's that game where one person has the name of a book or a film, then they have to act out. It's Aliens, yeah, and you have to guess the name of the film. So charades, lots of games. Other indoor games, well, mentioned 5-a-side football, right? So there may be some sport games that you do indoor volleyball, indoor petanque, bowls, bowling alley. Yes, you play, it's an indoor game. There's probably more, but I can't think of any right now. Some interesting language, right? A game you enjoyed. Enjoy. Go and look up enjoy on a thesaurus, remember? Or a collocation dictionary. Ozdic is a good one. OZDIC.com. Nice collocation dictionary. And get some expressions around that. So, for example, have a whale of a time. Yeah, a whale, that big animal in the sea that's a mammal, not a fish, as my daughter reminds me. Have a whale of a time. It means to have a great time. Why? I don't know. Do whales have fun? Probably. It's probably great fun being a whale in the sea. If you can avoid being attacked by fishermen sometimes. So have a whale of a time, right? I was watching this indoor football game and my cousin was playing, so it was really interesting. I had a whale of a time. Stress and intonation. I had a whale of a time. Stress, whale. Intonation, dee-dee-dee-dee, Intonation, the best thing for you to do is to imitate a native or proficient speaker and use the DD approach. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. I had a whale of a time. Just listen to the intonation and do it with a DD and try and follow it. Okay? Dee-dee-dee-dee. What time is it? Dee-dee-dee-dee. Dee-dee-dee-dee. And then put the words in. What time is it? Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. I had a whale of a time. You think I'm crazy, don't you? You think, Keith, you've gone mad. What are you doing? No, this is really, really good pronunciation practice. Keep doing it. Trust me, the DD method. I've just made up that name. I don't think it exists. Again, Keith, patent, the DD method. But it works. Try it. Okay. Other expressions, I made a note of a few. I remembered leap for joy. I was leaping for joy. That's a little bit poetic. Maybe walking on air. I was walking on air, walking on cloud 9. I was on cloud 9 is a more natural one. I was walking on cloud 9. I was on cloud 9. I was elated, delighted, over the moon. Right? I was over the moon because my cousin's team won the indoor football match. Emphasize the indoor. Make sure the examiner knows that you know. Right. So there's some great games you could talk about. Enough of this. Let's move on. Events. Let's have a look at events. Now, before I talk about events, I'm just going to throw out a bit of language here, because I think when you talk about events, it's really important to talk about the setting. It's also an opportunity to show off your language, the setting, the background to the event. Where were you? How did you get there? What were you doing? What had you done before? Right? So, for example, several years ago, I was living in London. I used to work in a bank there. And one day I went to see a show. Okay, that's the backdrop. So, several years ago, the time, I was in London. I was living in London. I was working in a bank. I was working for this company. And I used to do blah, 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 blah. I used to do customer service. It's a job I don't want to do. I used to do this. And then one day I decided to. One day I went. One day I past tense. And suddenly you've got a continuous, a used to, and a past tense. Very simple to give the background to your event. It's a lovely way to start an event question. Okay. And another nice trick I made, and I like this one, is with events, right? Something happens. Now, events can be a time, I don't know, event when you watched a performance, where someone apologized to you, where you couldn't use your phone, where you were bored, or you went on a colorful event, okay? When things happened. If the outcome wasn't very good, you can say, well, I wish I had known, then I wouldn't have done it, right? So the event didn't go very well and you regret the event. I wish I had known, then I wouldn't have done it. It's a brilliant grammatical sentence. If you can fit it in naturally, it's really nice, but it's a bit difficult and it might not fit. But if you feel there's a moment, an event, something happened that you were not happy about, and you're thinking, oh, regret, I wish I had known, then I wouldn't have done it. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Got it? Let's move on. Let's do the first one. Describe a performance you watched recently. You should say what it was, when you watched it, and explain how you felt about it. Okay, now, a performance that you watched recently. It should be recently, but listen, there's no definition of recently. If it was 2 years ago, well, just lie. I watched a performance last week. Okay, it was 2 years ago. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. The performance you watched, that's the important thing. Now, this could be live. You watched a live concert, but it could be on TV, right? Look at the question. It could be live or TV. I like that. A or B. It could be live or on TV. So you could talk about a concert, maybe, a play at the theatre. Something I've been watching on TV is, well, I'm sure you all watch these. Things like The Voice, Britain's Got Talent. There's so many of these. The X Factor. Different countries seem to have The Voice or the something's got talent. These can all be very good things to talk about. Again, be specific. So don't talk about the show. Talk about one performance. So talk about one singer. You know, there was once this 12-year-old and she came on and nobody thought she would be able to sing because she was so shy and timid. She was nervous on stage, and then she broke into song and she came out with this wonderful melodious voice that was just captivating. And I loved it. I was so engaged. She was a great performer. I felt over the moon for her. She gave a really good performance, a solid performance, and she won the competition, actually. Something like that, right? So you're using lots of nice language to talk about it. You could talk about performances if you have children, you know, the typical school performance where they get all the children to come on stage and they're all there and they're acting out some kind of a play, and they're all like 4 years old, and one of them's asleep, the other one's falling on the stage, the other one's picking his nose. Great school performances. You could talk about that. Or if you have, in many European countries we have this, and maybe in many parts of the world, we have street art or street theatre, where a street artist will be playing the guitar or singing or even acting. And you've got the statues, right? The guy who stands there and you throw a coin into his box. And they move. Great. That is a performance. All of these kinds of things they do on the street theatre, it's called. Of course, sport. Now, sports, people perform, right? Footballers, when they're playing football, that's a performance, really. You could talk about sport, a game. You could talk about Olympics. We talk a lot about a great performance. The young chap who was running 100 meters gave a great performance. He came in third place. Not as good as the guy who came in first place. But yes, athletics, the Olympics, all of these, they've got sports performances. You could talk about those. Why not? Yes. So I've mentioned a bit of language when I talked about the voice, but we can talk about a captivating performance, captures your attention, a captivating performance, a thrilling performance, a stunning performance. Just means, all of this means fantastic, right? Or what else did I have? That's all I had. Stunning, thrilling, captivating. When you're practicing, put it into a sentence, right? A captivating performance. She gave a captivating performance. She gave a captivating performance. Get your stress right. She gave a captivating performance. Brilliant. Lots of stuff. You could say, I was on the edge of my seat. Literally, on the edge of your seat is when you're so captivated, the suspense, you don't know what's going to happen next. You know, is she going to break the world record? I was on the edge of my seat. Great. Moving on. Describe a time someone apologized to you. You should say what happened, who the person was, why they apologized to you, and explain how you felt about it. Okay, first of all, the word apologize is one of those words that in the different word forms, the stress changes. So it's worth taking some time to learn the different words. Apologize, the verb. I apologize to you. An apology. An apology is the noun. She gave me an apology. Apologetic is the adjective. He was very apologetic because he had made a mistake. He was very apologetic. Okay, so just be careful with learn well and practice the different word forms. Now, talking about a time someone apologized, I think there are 3 reasons people apologize. Either they've made a mistake and they apologize. You've complained about something and they apologize. Or you've had an argument and then later you feel a bit bad, or they feel a bit bad and they apologize to you. Sometimes it's a battle, right? I'm not going to apologize. I'll wait for that. And there they say, I'm not apologizing. It was your fault. And nobody apologizes. No, come on. Apologize. Make up. Be friends again. So mistakes. Well, what kind of mistakes happen? I mean, you can think in your own life, the kind of mistakes people make. Friends make mistakes. I don't know, maybe they borrow something and they lose it. Or maybe they tell a secret to somebody, something you told them in confidence, then they told somebody else and you get angry and they apologize. So mistakes. Complaints, obviously restaurants is one of the one, or any customer complaint. So any kind of, come on, Keith. Restaurants, shops, banks. Wherever there's customer service, there can be a customer complaint. A school, any government situation. You're down at the town hall, you're looking to apply for a new driving license, and the service was terrible, and I complained, and then the manager came and apologized. He was very apologetic to me. So those kind of things, right? With complaints. Others, arguments. Oh, complaints. Sorry, I had more. In the shops where they've charged you the wrong amount, they've charged you too much, and then they realize their mistake. In the hotel, things are broken, things don't work, you complain, the manager comes and apologizes. He gives you an apology. The restaurant, the service is bad. There's a fly in your soup, or worse than that, a hair in your soup. And you complain, and then the apologetic manager apologizes with a very, very nice apology. Okay, those are different things you could talk about. Some of the language here that often the person apologizing says is, I should have. So should have means something that was my job to do, but I didn't do it. So I should do that. I should have done that, but I didn't do it. So very often in the apology, you'll see the manager, well, he said, I should have been more careful. Should have been. I should have been more careful. We should have checked it. The hotel, right? The water doesn't work. The toilet's broken. We're so sorry. We should have checked it. Your friend who told this secret to somebody, to some Tom, Dick and Harry, I shouldn't have said that. And they apologize. And they said they shouldn't have said that. So should have, shouldn't have, nice language to use with apologies. Also apologize. How do we apologize in English? We say sorry. So in the end, my friend said sorry. She felt guilty. She felt bad. She felt guilty. She really regretted it. So she said sorry. These are all words you can be using. Now, I did mention arguments. So if you have an argument with your loved one or your family or friend, some nice language here is we had an argument, we had a row. We had a row. Link it up. We had a row. We had an argument. She did this, she did that. I got upset. I got angry, and she apologized. We had a blazing row. Blazing is like the fire on fire. So if it's a big row, we had a blazing row. We had a bust-up. We had a bust-up. We had a quarrel. Quarrel is a bit smaller. We had a quarrel. We had a disagreement. That's a very diplomatic, in English, we're often diplomatic. We had a disagreement, right? So basically, we argued. We didn't agree. We had a disagreement. We had a quarrel or a row. But then in the end, he apologized and we made up. We made up means we came together again. We became amicable friends. We made up. We made up. That's easy. Made up. We made up. Or we put our differences aside. We put our differences, there are our differences, put them over here. We put them aside. We put our differences aside and we made up. Lots of nice language you can use there to apologize. Let's push forward. Okay, the next one. Describe a time when you could not use your mobile phone. You should say when it happened, where you were, why you could not use your mobile phone, and explain how you felt about it. So where are you not allowed to use your mobile phone? Well, it's surprising. When you start thinking about it, there's a lot of places, okay? Airports, especially when you go through the custom control or the immigration control or security checks. You can't use your mobile phone. Many banks do not allow you to use a mobile phone. Typically, government buildings do not allow the use of mobile phones. Exams, right? Again, IELTS. When you go to do an exam, usually you can't use a mobile phone because, of course, you can text and get all the answers. You could say, hey, Keith, what's the... No mobile phones. Churches and temples, usually they do not allow mobile phones. Either during the religious ceremony, during Mass or something, but often a lot of temples and places to visit, like if you've been to Italy and there's the Sistine Chapel, it's got this huge painting. And in fact, many Buddhist temples also do not allow you to take photos because there's something about taking the photo of the idol or the image of the god is not good. And so because phones are basically cameras, you're not allowed to use mobile phones. On the plane, when you're taking off or landing, generally you can't use a mobile phone. I think that's starting to change. It's interesting. I'm not sure why you can't use a mobile phone. In fact, have you seen, this is a really funny advert. Just look at this young lady who tries to explain why you can't use a mobile phone on a plane.
Gentlemen, as we prepare for takeoff, please turn off all electronic devices.
Why?
What's that?
Well, why do we have to turn off our electronic devices?
Because they can interfere with the plane's navigation.
Oh, okay.
So anyway...
How?
What's that?
How do they interfere with the plane's navigation?
Because the electronic signals can interfere with the signals between the plane and the radio tower on takeoff and landing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Let's all make sure that our seats are fully upright.
Wait. I mean, I get why I can't have a radio or whatever, but how is my Kindle going to screw things up?
That's a good question.
It's not just about radios. All devices have an electromagnetic field that can interfere with the radio frequencies.
Okay, that's cool.
All right, please make sure that all tray tables are...
Wait, so you're saying that a $90 million aircraft can't ignore the signal from my $40 iPod Shuffle? That's weird.
She's right. That is weird.
Yeah, now I'm confused again.
If they're so dangerous, why do you allow devices on the plane and not, I don't know, gels?
Yeah. Could I hold this plane hostage with my 3DS?
Some devices are more dangerous than others, but there isn't enough time to go through them one by one.
I mean, how come the plane doesn't interfere with my phone?
And why don't the other phones interfere with my phone?
I just always leave my phone on and nothing happens.
You can't! Everybody, no! All electronic devices have to be turned off.
I can't turn off my pacemaker.
Your pacemaker is fine.
Just opens up a whole new can of worms.
Airplanes are magic! Okay. No one knows why you have to turn off your phones, and you want to know why? Because no one knows how an airplane works!
Isn't that great? Also, I guess, concerts and theatres. If you go to the theatre nowadays and you try and record the concert or record the play, they now have people with green lights who will shine a light onto your screen so it doesn't work. You can't record the performance because obviously they don't want the performance going around on YouTube. They want people to come and watch the performance live. So often you're not allowed to use a phone in a concert or a theatre. It's interesting. Okay. Oh, I read about a really interesting restaurant, right? This was a French restaurant. Let me tell you, it's called Petit Jardin. In a restaurant in Saint-Guillaume-le-Désert. So this is near Marseille. Okay. Phones are completely banned. And apparently, because what they don't like is this ridiculous situation nowadays of people taking photos of their food. They want, or people texting each other when they're sat opposite each other and not talking. They want people to enjoy traditional basic food. And in France, I think my experience is food is not just eating, it's a social experience. You're there with people, you're bonding, you're eating together, you're sharing ideas, you are building relationships when you eat, even with your family, right? So phones out. So what this restaurant has done is they've got this kind of system that if anybody in the restaurant pulls out a phone, the waiter comes over with a yellow card, like in the football match, goes, yellow card, and you get a warning. If you bring out your phone again, he comes along, or she, the waitress, comes along and gives you a red card, and then you're sent off. They kick you out of the restaurant. It says in the article, if you get a red card, you will be escorted from the premises. And I wonder, do they charge you? Do they still charge you for the food? It's a wonderful idea. Only in Marseille. That's great. Good. I love that idea. Right. Sorry, serious. Let's move on. Describe a time you lost something and finally got it back. You should say what you lost, how you lost it, and how you got it back, and explain how you felt about it. Okay, thinking about when you lost something, well, and remember you have to get it back, so make sure you include that. Things you lose, well, you lose your umbrella if you're English. Because we always walk around with umbrellas all the time. No, it's true, we do. Umbrellas, wallets, that's often lost, right? Mind you, but if you get your wallet back, you'll be very lucky. I think about 90% of the cases you never get your wallet back because the thief or the pickpocket will steal your wallet, take the money, take the cards and throw the wallet in the bin. And so you never usually get it back. I don't say that from experience. It sounds like I'm experienced, right? No, it's just that I've read this in the newspaper. So it must be true. Okay, wallets. Books. Often we lose books, right? I've lost books from the library and I had to pay a fine. But often you get books back, right? You leave your book in the coffee bar, you come back and they say, oh, yes, we had it here. Many places like clothes, you lose your jacket or hat when you go to the cinema or to a conference or a concert because they have a cloakroom to take care of your clothes. And often they have a lost and found area. And if you go to the lost and found, you can often get it back. Likewise, I'm struggling today, aren't I? Likewise, if you go on a train, often train stations have a lost and found, airports lost and found. So if you lose some item of clothing or an accessory, maybe an umbrella, not a belt. Why would you lose a belt? Why did you take your belt off? No, not a belt. Maybe earrings you can lose, a hat, gloves, if it's winter. You can go to the lost and found and get it back. Other things that could be lost, and I know this sounds silly, but your car or your bicycle. And I've done this and I haven't lost it. I've just forgotten where I've left it. So I get it back. But you could talk about that as well. You could talk about losing your sanity if you're working 12 hours a day and your boss is on your back, all the pressure, and you lose your mind, you lose your sanity. Now, I'm not sure if you could talk about that. It would be very funny, but you'd have to, how do you get your sanity back? Be careful with that one. That one's only for Band 8 students. That's quite a difficult one to talk about. But lots of things you could say there about losing something and getting it back. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop here because, again, this is becoming a Star Wars epic. It's a bit of a longer video than I thought. We've talked about events and activities, most of the kind of the new questions. There are lots more questions, but I will be doing more model answers and putting them into my Udemy course. And which means that if you're on the Udemy course, all the updates every 4 months you get for free. You just go on there and you get them. If you haven't taken the course yet, go and check it out on Udemy. The link's below. It's really good to know all the answers. Well, to help you learn and get better answers, it actually teaches you English, right? It teaches you the language, idioms, works on your pronunciation so that you can give better answers in the IELTS speaking test. That's why I'm here, to help you with all of that. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do tell your friends, professors, workmates, pets, everybody. Subscribe over here. All the links and information are below. And that's it. I can't wait to see you soon. I think soon we'll be looking at some part 3 questions. I'm looking forward to that already. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.